Hey everyone, it's Adam again. It's been a couple of weeks. Been busy doing different things, and actually, one of them is one of the things that I want to talk about today. I always try to have a couple of topics. One of them, the things that I want to talk about today, is dating for people with a disability, because this can be one of the biggest challenges. And I had a wonderful first date last Saturday with a woman who I hope I continue to see a lot of and spend a lot of time with. Who knows? Never know those things right off the bat, but I get a good feeling. Not just my intuition; she also has conveyed to me that she hopes to see more of me. But dating when you have a disability can be a real challenge. I had a very frank conversation with her name is Sarah with Sarah last week even, and I said to her, one of the things that is a part of every relationship that I can't do is pick up the nonverbal cues. A lot of those are things that are kind of initiate intimacy. And that's something it's hard for me to know in a nonverbal way if my partner, especially as a male, wearing traditional gender stereotype roles, the male is supposed to quote unquote make the first move. It's very hard for me to know if she's going to be receptive to that from nonverbal cues, from body language, from looks, from things like that. That's a visual challenge, but people with disabilities, sort of writ large, tend to have challenges in getting into relationships. You'll even see there's been legislation to bar people in different states who have intellectual disabilities from having relationships and procreating. Now, obviously, you can't stop people from being intimate with each other. But there was back in the day, not thankfully not now, but there were programs like forced sterilization for people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. But it's not just those; it's physical disabilities as well. Even something like getting into a relationship, especially online dating nowadays, right? That's how most dating is done. Not most, a lot of dating is done nowadays. So I had to think about, okay, do I disclose that on my online profile? Do I say, hey, by the way, I'm a mostly blind guy. Like I do use a cane, I don't drive. You're doing all the driving. Um, you probably haven't had to think about that kind of a thing. Somebody with mobility issues who maybe uses a wheelchair or a walker or whatever it might be, they have to think about those things as well. Someone who is hard of hearing or completely profoundly deaf has to have similar conversations with themselves about how do I approach this. And there is absolutely a degree, just like there is in employment, of discrimination. Now, it's not illegal. Obviously, you have a right to choose who you want to date, but it's hard on an emotional level to know that there are women out there who have absolutely said to me flat out, and also I'm sure plenty who never did say it, I'm not going to date you because I think your disability is going to be a burden on me. Or maybe it's because they want to have kids. Now, I personally don't want to have kids in my future. I'm 40 years old already. It's just not something I want. Sarah and I have talked about that too. Not that it matters. Um, but maybe they want to have kids and they are worried about the genetics of that, and adoption isn't something they want to consider. So all of those things are things that are extra layers of challenges for somebody in dating and relationships. And everybody, I think the vast majority of people want to have a significant other in their lives. And I certainly always have, and I've had some good relationships, and I've had some not great relationships, and I've had some awful online dating experiences, and I've had some good ones. So we'll see where this next relationship goes, but I am hopeful. Um, so I think the other thing I wanted to talk about today a little bit was disability as a political action. And what do I mean by that? Well, we all know about the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? It was passed in 1990. It's done a lot of wonderful things over the last 25 years. Certainly, the Obamacare, as it's called, the Affordable Care Act in 2010, had provisions so that people can't be discriminated in insurance based on pre-existing conditions, which certainly is impactful for people with disabilities like myself. But there's a woman this week, Carrie Ann Lucas, who is a champion of disability advocacy, who was essentially killed by a healthcare company. She had healthcare through, I believe, the nonprofit that she had started, maybe even through the Obamacare system. I'm not sure. She became ill. There was a $2,000 medication or procedure. I'm not entirely clear from the news articles that she needed, and her healthcare company denied it. And her health spiraled from that denial, and she passed away this week. And many people, and I can understand why, have said that this healthcare company murdered her. And again, for people with disabilities, lifetime caps, healthcare coverage, medical prescription coverage, all of those things are major, major obstacles that the average person, certainly everyone has to deal with health insurance nowadays, but the average person doesn't have to think about it every day like people with disabilities do. I certainly do. Is my eye doctor covered? Is the medicine I need for other situations that I have covered? And those situations are directly attributable to other things that I've had to do because of my vision. So all of those things are political, and I've always been very political. I was such a nerd at such a young age that my bar mitzvah party theme in 1991 was the 2020 Democratic National Convention. And sadly, I do have the pictures to prove that. Politics has always been a passion of mine. It still is, although I'm not as involved in it as I used to be. I used to work on a lot of campaigns. My first one was 10 years old. Shout out to George Mitchell. But I also have continued to be engaged and have chosen to be involved and around people who have that advocacy gene in their DNA. And it's something I remain very passionate about. Oh, Bartlett's making noise. He wants to be included. And the opportunity for things like the ADA and the ACA and other things that impact people with disabilities, there's not much representation of people with disabilities in elected office. There's some, certainly, FDR, president for 12 years before he passed away, although they made great efforts to hide the fact that he was in a wheelchair and had mobility issues and other disabilities. Certainly, there's, for example, there's Senator Bob Dole, who has had mobility issues for years. There's now a gentleman, he's a Republican down in Texas, I believe, Dan Crenshaw, is a veteran who lost an eye serving this country. And there are other people with disabilities, Congressman from Rhode Island, where I live, Jim Langevin, who uses a wheelchair as well. But the representation is limited. And what does that mean? Well, we talk about representation in terms of people of color, in terms of gender, in terms of religious representation, all those things. But when we don't talk about representation as it relates to people with disabilities, it minimizes the impact that the laws that are being passed have on people with disabilities. And the ADA has been great, but I think this, and the statistics bear this out, the ADA has done an awesome job of helping people get physical access to public spaces, housing, things like that. What they have still not done a great job of is giving people access to employment. As we talked about in the first video, the percentages are what the percentages are. They're still 80%. The percentages of people who have four-year degrees and beyond with disabilities who are unemployed are actually higher than 80%. We can talk about in a later video all the reasons for that. But the point is, self-advocacy, whether it's in dating, whether it's in politics, is critical for people with disabilities. If you don't have that in your inherent DNA, you have to find people who can train you to do it. Because if you can't stand up for yourself in a relationship, if you can't tell your partner or your prospective partner what you need and what your disability actually means and how it doesn't mean that you'll be a burden, if you can't tell a legislator or an elected official what you need as a person with disability to have fair access to things like healthcare, to jobs, to all those things, then you're doing yourself a disservice and you're doing them a disservice by not educating them in a way that is fair and complete. So those are the two topics I really wanted to talk about today. Relationships, advocacy, they are all related because it's all about interpersonal relationships and building those connections both in the romantic space and also in the advocacy space. So we'll talk again. I'm going to also post some additional videos that I posted last year and then had to take down for a variety of reasons. So I'm going to post some of those as well as this. Thanks as always for watching. Comment, subscribe, like, all those things you're supposed to tell people on YouTube to do. Have a great week. I'll see you next week.